Freilich in Shushan Purim. We'll continue on to the next Maimer, Maimer Ki Sisa. Now the Maimer Ki Sisa was said by the Rebbe on Shabbos Mevarchim Adar Rishon. So it's really before the Purim Maimer which we learned. You can see in the Maimer that it was sort of a hemshech to the Maimer Ve'ela Mishpatim, which we learned earlier. That was said on Shabbos Mevarchim. Actually, this is Shabbos Mevarchim Adar Sheni. Shabbos Mevarchim Adar Rishon was Ve'ela Mishpatim. Shabbos Mevarchim Adar Sheni was Ki Sisa. You can see it was a hemshech. As well as we saw, the Maimer Ve'ela Mishpatim was, as you can see in the Maimer, it brought also points, and it looks like it was sort of a hemshech to the Mamarim of Basi Legani and Yesheves Baganim. It's almost like this is one long hemshech from Basi Legani, Yesheves Baganim, Ve'ela Mishpatim, and Ki Sisa. And in certain ways, V'kibala Yehudim is also a continuation, but for sure these four Mamarim are sort of a hemshech. The Maimer Ki Sisa is Parshas Shkalim, and that's what's read in Parshas Shkalim about Machzis HaShekel. And the content, as was in the Maimer Ve'ela Mishpatim beforehand, is about how Moshe Rabbeinu is Ki Sisa. He lifts up the Rosh B'nai Yisrael. He lifts up the head of every Jew. That he's the Raya Mehemna, the faithful shepherd and the shepherd of faith, who zanu mefarnes, who feeds the emunah and brings the emunah that is inside every Jew b'pnimius, that it should become internalized. So the Rebbe starts off with the beginning of the parsha that says Ki Sisa is Rosh B'nai Yisrael, and the question is, why does it say the word Ki Sisa? The meaning of Ki Sisa is Rosh B'nai Yisrael is that Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu to count the Jewish people. The word should have been Ki Sifkait. Sifkait means to count. The word Tisa means if you lift up the head of the Jewish people. Why use the word Tisa, lifting up? And then the Rebbe goes on to explain the idea that Ki Sisa, the pasuk of Ki Sisa, is talking about the mitzvah of Machzis HaShekel. In Machzis HaShekel, we find various concepts or various options. There's 4 different options in this mitzvah of Machzis HaShekel, 4 different ideas in the mitzvah of Machzis HaShekel, and in a way, they actually go from one extreme to the other. Specifically, there's the one idea which is the mitzvah of Machzis HaShekel in the Midbar. The Jewish people had a mitzvah to give half a shekel. Rashi explains it more as a reshus, not a chayva, not an obligation and a mitzvah, but rather Hashem is telling Moshe Rabbeinu, Ki Sisa, when you will wish to count the Jewish people, then how should you do it? Through taking from them Machzis HaShekel. Jewish people shouldn't be counted directly, but rather it should be by taking something from them, taking a Machzis HaShekel. So it's an optional thing. It's not even something on its own. Ki Sisa es Roish, taken Machzis HaShekel, but rather it's something which is when you want to count the Jewish people, this is the way to count them. The second option, which is similar to the first, and that is that it is a mitzvah that Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, I want you to count the Jewish people through taking a Machzis HaShekel. But again, it's something which is only for that time. In the time of the Midbar, Hashem wanted Moshe Rabbeinu to count the Jewish people, and that the way he should do it is by taking Machzis HaShekel. Both of these options are that Machzis HaShekel, even if it's a mitzvah, it's only for that time. It's not something which is l'doiris, it's not something for all times. And on the contrary, in all times, it's a better thing, it's preferable not to count the Jewish people, even if they're counted by way of Machzis HaShekel. In general, Jewish people shouldn't be counted like we see by Yoav ben Sruya with David HaMelech. Then when David HaMelech wanted to count the Jewish people, Yoav wasn't happy, and he was right. No matter how it's done, it's better Jews shouldn't be counted. At that time in the Midbar, either as an optional thing or as an obligation. Hashem wanted Moshe Rabbeinu to count the Jewish people, and he told him do it through Machzis HaShekel. Then we find another aspect in Machzis HaShekel. The Machzis HaShekel was used for something. The half shekels that were given were used for the Adonim of the Mishkan, for the bases, the copper bases of the Krashim of the Mishkan. The Mishkan is something which lasts forever. Even if physically we don't have the Mishkan now, but we say that Ma'aseh Yidei Moshe Nitzchim, the actions of Moshe Rabbeinu are eternal, and therefore the Mishkan is something that lasts forever. It's Nitzchi, it never was destroyed. So that's Machzis HaShekel for the base and the foundation of the Mishkan, something that lasts forever. And moreover, we find also that there is a mitzvah l'deiros. There's a mitzvah for all times of taking Machzis HaShekel, which happened throughout the generations. Nowadays we do it as a zecher, as a commemoration on Tainis Esther or before Purim, to remember the mitzvah of Machzis HaShekel. But throughout all times when there's a Beis HaMikdash, there's a constant mitzvah every year to take Machzis HaShekel. This Machzis HaShekel has nothing to do with counting the Jewish people. In fact, we don't find anywhere that they counted these Machzis HaShekels that were taken every single year from the Jewish people. It was taken in order to be used for the Karbanis. So we have two ideas of Machzis HaShekel. There's the Machzis HaShekel in the Midbar, which was only for the time, at that time, and it was for the purpose of counting the Jewish people. Then we have what continued from that Machzis HaShekel of the Midbar, that it's something which continued forever in the Mishkan, which was something that was eternal. And moreover, the idea of giving Machzis HaShekel every single year, but that wasn't counted and had nothing to do with counting the Jewish people, that was given for the Karbanis. For all of these options of Machzis HaShekel, there's an introduction. Whether it's one type of Machzis HaShekel only at that time, whether it's the Machzis HaShekel, the mitzvah at all times, there's an introduction of Sisa Esroish B'nai Yisrael, that Moshe Rabbeinu has to lift up the head of the Jewish people, which that's an introduction for Machzis HaShekel and for everything else that it says in the Parsha. What is that Tisa Esroish B'nai Yisrael? Why is that introduction? So here the Rebbe explains a very interesting thing. The idea of the Machzis HaShekel that was given every year, like we said, was given for Karbanis. What is the idea of a Karban? And in continuation to what we've been speaking about in the previous Mamarim, especially in Basilagania, Shavas Baganim, and Ve'ela Mishpatim, and as well as the Maimer that we learned already, which is the next Maimer of V'kibul HaYudim. A person finds himself down here in this world, where he's distant from the reality of what he's all about. He's far away from Hashem, not just far away in a distance way, but far away by his very essence of the fact that a person is in a physical world, which is the total opposite of the reality of spirituality. On the contrary, the Nefesh Abamis, the animal soul, conceals and hides over the reality of a Lakus that a person is really all about. And that's the idea of Karbanis. Adam ki yakriv, a Karban is in order to weaken, on one hand, the Nefesh Abamis, because through the Karban that was brought up to Hashem, that the animal was brought to Hashem, that's the idea of taking away a person, giving something of his, giving something from within himself, and even deeper, the spiritual concept of the Karbanis is giving from his own animal to Hashem, and in that way, taking away, diminishing the power of the animal soul, and at the same time lifting itself up, which is by bringing the animal up to Hashem, by sacrificing and bringing the animal to Hashem. Through that the person is bringing his own animal soul and his own existence to bring it closer to the reality of Hashem. That's the idea of Karbanis, and through bringing Karbanis, this was something which connected and brought every Jew closer to his true existence to Hashem by diminishing that which covers over the true existence, and on the contrary, bringing it up to Hashem. In today's day, when we don't have Karbanis, it says Tefillah is bimkoim Karbanis tiknum, we have instead the idea of davening, Tefillah. Tefillah is the same idea as Karbanis, Because when we daven to Hashem, we're doing the same thing. We're diminishing our nefesh habamis, our animal soul. We're taking by davening and recognizing the reality that the animal soul and myself, bringing myself over to Hashem, taking away from something that's part of my physical existence. And on the contrary, by contemplating and understanding the greatness of Hashem in a way that even the Nefesh Habamis can understand it, bringing that closer to Hashem. That's davening. In davening we find there's these two ideas, that the davening is called Shas Sleisa, Shas Krava. The time of Tefillah is a time of war. It's war with the Nefesh Habamis, and at the same time it's Tefillah, Teufel, it's connection. We're connecting ourselves to the reality of Hashem, and that comes through the contemplation and thinking and recognition of the fact that my entire existence is Hashem, which is through thinking about the greatness of Hashem during davening. Now we say that as an introduction, in order to be able to get there, in order to be able to have this idea of davening. For that we need to have first Ki Sisa as Rosh B'nai Yisrael. We need Moshe Rabbeinu, the Raya Mehemna, the faithful shepherd, the shepherd of faith, who enables us to take this emunah and to contemplate and to bring it into Pnimius. And like we said in the Maimer Ve'ela Mishpatim, that is through the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu gives a Jew das. Das is connecting strongly to the reality of Hashem through the introduction of Ki Sisa, through Moshe Rabbeinu bringing us and giving us this ability. That's how we're able to connect to Hashem through davening. And it's an interesting thing, which is something that we explained and we learned in the earlier Mamarim that we learned. And that's the idea that why do we need Moshe Rabbeinu? Why can't a person do it on his own? Because a person on his own is connected to that reality, the physical reality of the world. It's only by a person leaving his existence. And in order for a person to go out of that existence, he needs Moshe Rabbeinu. And only when he leaves that existence is he able to then have das, a connection to something other than himself. Davening can only be done through the first having the introduction of Ki Sisa Rosh B'nai Yisrael. What does Moshe Rabbeinu do? Moshe Rabbeinu takes the emunah, which could be in a way of makif. It's above the person. And Moshe Rabbeinu takes it and brings it in Pnimius. What's the idea of the emunah being makif? Every Jew is a believer. Every Jew has an emunah, which is a Yerusha lanu me'aviseinu. It's an inheritance that we get from our ancestors. That we have this natural belief in Hashem. We know that Hashem exists. And yet, this could be in a way of makif, and like the Gemara says, Ganva pum machtarta rachmana karya. A ganav, a thief, when he's a pum machtarta, when he's breaking into a house in order to steal, he calls out to Hashem that Hashem should help him. Now the fact that he's calling out to Hashem means that he really believes and knows that the only one that runs the world is Hashem. And that if he wants to be successful, he needs Hashem to help him. And yet that doesn't stop him from stealing. Not only stealing, but in a way of a ganav. That the difference between a gazlan and a ganav is that a gazlan goes and steals openly. It means he's not afraid neither of Hashem nor of human beings. A ganav goes in a secret to steal. That means he's afraid of being caught by human beings. And yet his emunah, the fact that he knows that Hashem exists and runs the world, doesn't cause him to be afraid of Hashem. And doesn't cause him to realize that if Hashem runs the world, He can give me my parnasa in a way that's proper, in a way that's kosher, in a way that I'm not going against Hashem. And in the same way, every person has a emunah, but the emunah could be in a way of makif. I know that Hashem exists, but yet it doesn't necessarily affect me. And the Rebbe gives examples that this is both by Yoshvei Oyel and by Balei Esek. A Balei Esek, a businessman, even though he knows that Birchas Hashem Tashir, that the only way that he succeeds in his business is because Hashem gives his bracha. And a person realizes and knows it that it all comes from Hashem. He knows that Hashem gives me the power and the strength to be successful. And yet, even though he knows that, and he sees it b'chosh, he sees it clearly. He sees clearly that Hashem is the one who's giving him his success. and he sees that he was Zeicha and he made money only through Hashem's brachas, and he went and he took the money and he elevated by giving Meiser or Chaimish 10 or 20% or whatever's in between, and he used that. And tzedakah is the only mitzvah that you can test Hashem with, which means he sees that Hashem actually gives him more and that he's able to elevate the physical world that he gets and bring it up to Ruchnius. And yet, he doesn't bring it in b'pnimis, he doesn't internalize that idea, and he starts trying to make tricks and games in business in order to succeed, and he'd rather overlook a time of going to daven and a time of a shir and Torah because he says, now I have to go to my business. But Hashem gives you the power to do your business. So obviously if you're going to do what Hashem wants and learn Torah and daven, then you'll be more successful. And yet he takes away from the time which should be for learning Torah and davening because of the tachbulos in his business. And the Rebbe brings the same idea by a Yeshiva Hil, but we'll do that in Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow.